right, happy holidays. I'm Ryan here with Emily. We've got some pre-recorded but delightful content for you.
I even waved. If you're watching this, I waved, saying hi to everyone.
So we're going to play a couple of our favorite clips from over the last year.
Just remembering that some of this happened in the last year is insane. Like the amount of different debates that some of this I forgot was in the last year. This year has been such a blur because of the news cycle.
I don't remember what I did this morning.
It's hard to remember these things. But one thing you did do not that long ago was try to get Matt Walsh to talk a little bit about Haiti.
Yeah, I was surprised that one went so viral because
he kind of agreed with you.
He was agreeing with me. I was just explaining to him what happened throughout Haitian history, but more importantly, like the recent Haitian history. He's the one that brought up Haiti.
It's an interesting exchange because there are pockets of history that used to be sort of hobby horses for people who read Chomsky, like Central America stuff, that read Chomsky or Howard Zinn, or people whose names aren't even familiar, that are very familiar in like leftist circles. But the right has started to pay attention to some of these things now as well. And there are some people on the right who could tell you exactly about the occupation of Haiti. And Matt Walsh's agreement with you in this clip, which I believe was in the fall. So it was like September, October. Yeah. We had him on around his Am I a Racist movie coming out. So this wasn't a debate between Matt Walsh and another person we brought on the show. It was kind of both of us pushing him. But you, I guess the friction on this is interesting between you guys because he's not like chained to the quote unquote old right foreign policy.
Right, but he refuses to connect it to his immigration politics. And I think maybe one reason it went viral is that became so clear, the disconnect between those two things. And also, I think the fact that he brought it up. I think if you bring something up and then get clowned on it, that's different than if somebody comes at you with something they've prepared.
I also think people like to flex on their knowledge of certain things by sharing. Be like, Matt Walsh is so dumb he didn't know this about Haiti,
right,
but I did.
Yes, I knew that. So we can roll that little bit of this.
Everything I've heard has been critical of the fact that we're importing, thousands of people from the third world who are coming into communities. And look, America, nobody thinks that it will benefit America to become more like Haiti. Nobody thinks that. Or I would challenge anyone, if they do think that, to explain how that's the case. Like, in what way could this country be improved by making it more like Haiti? When you look at Haiti, what part of Haiti are you saying to yourself, we need more of that?
Beaches.
Well, we have more beaches than them too, right? Don't we?
Right.
We're a much bigger country.
We don't want a marine invasion and occupation of the United States that constantly decapitates governments and takes the money out of the country and saddles us with
we don't want the Clintons
debt
either.
from a revolution. Yeah,
right. Although I don't. So you're saying that
we wouldn't want to be like basically a colony that the entire West spends 200 years punishing after the Haitian Revolution.
I get that. I understand that, but also at a certain
point, wouldn't want that. No, yes.
We wouldn't want that, but I would also say that that's not entirely why Haiti's in the position that it's in. I mean, at a certain point, as a country, you have to stand on your own 2 feet and take care of yourself. And
but at what point is that? They elect Aristide and we overthrow Aristide. Then they elect Jovenel Moïse. Jovenel Moïse has assassinated a bunch of people with American connections, and then we install in 2021, like the United States installed the prime minister that we just ousted. Like, so we could say, okay, yeah, you got to get over the 200 years ago, but like we're still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not in favor of. I'm very non-interventionist in my policies, so I'm not in favor of most of the things that we're doing in other countries.
We just made the new government in Haiti in a hotel room in Jamaica, and then we insisted that whatever government we made in Jamaica had to allow Kenyan troops to come in under the flag of the UN in order to go to war with the gangs.
Yeah, I'm not. Look, I'm not interested in. Right. If it were up to me, I'm not interested in doing anything in Haiti. Like let Haiti be Haiti and take care of them. That's sort of my whole point here. Let them take care of themselves and their own problems. I'm also not saying that there's like never a scenario where we would let someone from Haiti into the country. But it doesn't have to just be about Haiti. But when you're throwing open the gates and just inviting anyone, in particular,
I
the
guess
third world.
I guess your assumption there was that it is Haitian people that are creating the conditions on Haiti, and that if the Haitian people come to Springfield, they will recreate the conditions
Well, but I don't
that
think
are
you can-
Haiti in Springfield. Whereas what I'm saying is that it's actually the U.S. that is
I don't think you can entirely put it on.
largely.
But it's still a country comprised of people, right?
But without its own autonomy.
Okay, but you can't. I don't think you can entirely put it on the United States. Like, Haitian people have nothing to do whatsoever with the state of their own country. Nothing. I mean, I think that's a bit absurd. I'm perfectly willing to, as I said, agree that a lot of the United States sort of adventurism and interventions in other countries has been unwise, and I'd prefer for us to focus on our own country and not try to build governments in other countries. But at the same time, I think that you can't completely absolve the people of any country of the problem, just like in this country. The problems that we have in our country, we can point to the government, we can point to immigration, we point to all those things. But ultimately, like, the people of the country have to be responsible for their own nation. And I say that of all nations.
For the next one, Emily, I thought our interview with Don Lemon was so interesting for how uninteresting it was. Like, it was profoundly and fascinatingly uninteresting.
I remember wrapping that interview and just looking at you and producer Mac and be like, this guy wants to go back to CNN, right? Like,
Yeah.
He's doing independent media and talking about how great it is, but he wants to go back to CNN.
Is he going to make it back to CNN?
I don't know. I mean, they've brought Brian Stelter back, and
Who
by
we
the
also
way,
had on.
we also, this is like one of the Don Lemon one. I saw this on our plans for talking about some of our favorite clips from CounterPoints over the last year. I was like, we had Don Lemon on in the last year. It seems like it was so long ago, but we also had Brian Stelter on, lest we forget, two of CNN's most I don't know, buzzy personalities over the course of the Trump years, neither of which was with CNN anymore. And then Stelter came back, obviously, but both of them seem to want to be going back to CNN, which is interesting. I mean, you can't, it's almost like you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
But I thought Lemon was so interesting because he was such an influential media figure, and it was really interesting to get a window into how he sees the world. So let's roll a little Don Lemon here.
I have a question on that, actually, because I don't think either of us is interested in getting into any drama with your old network, but I do think the Nikki Haley comment, I found it hilarious, frankly, but we don't have to get into it. All I want to say is, was that an excuse to purge you? Do you feel like do you think that your former colleagues cared deeply about Nikki Haley's feelings, or do you think that was sort of a fig leaf to start purging maybe allies of Jeff Zucker? What's your read on that whole situation? Because you did, I think, apologized for it, and everything sort of spiraled from there, it seemed like, from the outside at least.
Look at my face.
In your prime.
I will let your comments stand. If you think, I think that you are a very smart woman, and I will just let it stand.
In her prime,
Sounds
no
good.
doubt, right?
Of course.
One of the criticisms I had of CNN over the years is around its coverage of the kind of left wing of the Democratic Party, and in particular, missing the kind of the energy behind the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, and then missing it again the second time around. 2020, Bernie Sanders almost seized the nomination. And it seemed to catch the media flat-footed both times. I'm curious what your editorial meetings were like throughout 2016 and 2020, or was there just so much Trump that there just wasn't kind of the oxygen for the Democratic primaries?
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, Brian. What are you asking me, that you think that Bernie Sanders wasn't given his due in traditional media? Is that what you're saying?
And let me tell you a little story about that real quick. Like, so in February of 2020, you remember Rebecca Cutler, the old head of CNN talent? Mm-hmm. She reached out to, or somehow we got connected. I went back, still at The Intercept, but I was at The Intercept at the time, and she said, "Look, we have really missed the boat on covering the left wing of the Democratic Party. Like, we need people who have covered that before and who understand this rising progressive energy." And so CNN brought me in and said, "Look, we need to get you on some of these programs because we need somebody, who can speak to this obviously now rising energy within the Democratic Party. And then that happened a couple times. And then Bernie lost the South Carolina primary and got wiped out on Super Tuesday. And they said, actually, never mind, we're good. Like we don't need to worry about this kind of progressive wing. Maybe in 4 years if it bubbles back up. But there was a fear inside CNN reflected through Rebecca's outreach that they had missed something fundamental about the country that was represented by the rise of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know what conversation you had with Rebecca, who I know, and so I won't get into that. But I think if there was any outreach for you to cover something that was happening in the news or the zeitgeist or politically, I think that Rebecca should be commended for recognizing that. The second part is that I've never heard anybody say that CNN should be more left. So, hey, there's a first time for everything. I didn't necessarily think CNN was left. I thought that CNN was about facts. I think CNN has the best journalists in the world. But I also think, you asked me what my editorial meetings were like. I mean, no one was trying to push Bernie Sanders, and at least in my editorial meetings, and I would venture to speak for the network now. Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't think that anyone was trying to push Bernie Sanders out. I think that Bernie Sanders may have had sort of outsized influence with a certain segment of the Democratic Party. But all polls in 2016 pointed to Hillary Clinton. All polls in 2020 and public sentiment pointed to Joe Biden. And so what was shocking, I think, to myself was the reaction from Democrats to the nomination of Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders in 16, especially in 2020. I couldn't get to gauge it because I didn't get to go to the conventions. I think that was around, because of COVID. But here's a shocking thing. So networks have editorial calls or meetings with campaigns, right, to figure out how you're going to cover the campaigns. In my experience, having those editorial calls and meetings with the Trump folks, they knew every single thing that was happening in the media. Every single thing that Don Lemon had ever said about Donald Trump, his folks knew about it. They knew where to place him. They knew who they wanted him to talk to. They knew who they wanted him to call into or do in-person interviews. By contrast, the Clinton campaign was so above it that, hey, they had no idea what I was saying about Hillary Clinton or whatever they were, she did not have as much media outreach. She got to pick and choose where she went, and rather than just doing what Donald Trump did. So listen, I think that the Hillary, but yet and still, the public wanted Hillary Clinton. They didn't want Bernie Sanders. So I say that to say, when after all of, Republicans did not love Donald Trump. They held their nose and they voted for him. All of the never Trumpers, all of the people, from Ted Cruz on down, when he became the nominee, everyone got behind him. When we were at the convention, it was Trump, 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 Trump. It wasn't Jeb. It wasn't, Cruz. It wasn't Rubio. It wasn't any of those people. By the time we got to the Democratic convention and Hillary Clinton was a nominee, people were yelling, Bernie, Bernie. And we were like, what the hell is going on? So I think that Bernie Sanders, that wing of the Democratic Party actually did as much, if not more damage to Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. So look,
but I think that's an interesting question to be asking, to say what.
I think Bernie Sanders is a fantastic politician.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a lesson in it for Democrats that you have to get behind the person who is the actual nominee, and you cannot have sour grapes over the person who did not become the nominee. That's how the process worked. So I know that people are upset, and they're upset about the progressive wing, and they don't think it gets covered enough. But this is where we are. The nominee or the person is Joe Biden. The nominee or the person then was Hillary Clinton. I think the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party should have gotten behind them. And that's the reason, one of the reasons, the main reasons that we're in the predicament that we are now and that we had a Trump presidency.
But I guess the point would be, if CNN anchors are at the 2016 convention saying, what the hell is going on, that's kind of reflective of the point that I was making, that you guys should have seen this coming and should have known what was going on, where was this anger coming from?
Just because we're realistic about who the nominee is, doesn't mean that we didn't see it coming. Bernie Sanders was not going to win. Bernie Sanders was not going to be the nominee. So I turned to my producer and said that. I'm not saying this on the air, but maybe I did say it on the air. I was surprised because Republicans fall in line. Democrats fight each other. Democrats usually wet the bed. I'm sorry. Bernie Sanders was not the nominee, nor was he ever going to become the nominee. And I know that people are upset by it, but that's the truth. It's the same thing for Republicans. Nikki Haley is not the nominee. She's not going to become the nominee. Donald Trump is a nominee, regardless if you like it or not. The guy's in court. And guess what? Republicans are going to fall in line. And if Donald Trump becomes the president again, it'll be because Republicans fell in line.
Ryan, people loved your barb at Don Lemon, by the way.
Which barb?
The one where you said that I was in my prime.
Oh.
Which barb? Yeah, there were a few. You threw a few of them in there.
Yes.
He
got it. Actually, one of, I think, a contributing factor to his firing was saying that something about women not being in their prime or something.
Well, we asked him about this. Actually made a little bit of news. He said he believed that was used as an excuse to get rid of him, was sort of cooked up as an excuse to get rid of him. So anyway, fun stuff. Vaush versus Dave Smith was that one people
Apparently
really
our most
loved.
Popular podcast of the year.
Very popular podcast download, and it was interesting. That was interesting. Dave Smith is, I mean, I could listen to him for hours. He's a very interesting thinker, and to have him, I think, pitted against Vaush it drew out the right contrast. I think maybe that's why people liked it.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Yeah, let's play a little bit of that.
To zoom out a little bit, during the Cold War, we drew the line at the Elbe River. Halfway through Germany, on one side was the Soviet Union, and on the other side was NATO. And we're now talking about Ukraine, and you could sit here with a straight face and say, Putin is expansionist. Okay. I mean, if that's how you want to look at it, it's like, let's just look at the actual reality of what's happening here. It's not that Putin has been this expansionist force. Putin has been almost at every turn reacting to the expansion of the American empire.
You got to give them agency,
and
man.
Ukraine. That's just not true. It's not denying someone agency to say that they're responding to something. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Everyone's responding to everything. That's all life.
Sure.
No one just acts without, you didn't fall out of a coconut tree.
That's just a cop-out. That doesn't mean anything.
You're the one providing the cop-out. You're saying that it's not possible for Putin to have a distinctly expansionist element to his rule because everyone's just responding to. So do you believe Putin has a distinctly expansionist element to his rule?
Okay, no, that's not a binary. One is it's not possible.
Wait, do you think he does or doesn't?
Hold on. So instead of just interrupting me, let me make the point. You just laid out a binary between is it possible he has expansionist intentions and does he have expansionist intentions? That's not a binary. There are some expansionist desires that he has. No, in fact, if you actually educate yourself on this topic. It was our CIA director who said in the Niet Means Niet memo leaked by Julian Assange that verbatim, this was a choice that Vladimir Putin did not want to have to make. This was a choice that Russia did not want to get involved in this war.
And yet he made the choice. He made the choice to invade, to bring troops down to the Ukrainian border, to commit to multiple years of, come on, this is the thing. I ask you for what can we do now? And immediately it's back to the Iron Curtain.
Well, hold on.
Vash,
hold on. Here's what happened. I'm sorry,
I just want to know in the modern context.
I get it. Actually, what happened was you made a long statement and ended with that question. And I said, let me answer that question. But first, let me deal with what you said at the beginning of your statement. And then you started interrupting me. So no, it's not that I'm not willing to answer that question. It's that I had to point out, I think, a lot of the errors that you're making. Now, if you want just to say, what could we do right now? Well, look, we're going to have to be realists about this situation and admit that Ukraine is losing this war and that they're not going to drive Russia out of Crimea. That's a joke. They're not going to drive Russia out of many of the territories that they've taken right now. We should be working toward a deal, a peaceful solution, which has been on the table several times throughout this war, and it's been the West who has been trying to squash it.
Well, that's
what we should do.
Not true at all, though. You've seen, I assume you've read the deals that Putin has put through. Zelensky hasn't been particularly amenable to them himself. The narrative that the West is squashing the peace deals, which is blown up largely because of that one Boris Johnson visit early on in the conflict. Don't get me wrong, okay? The West has its own interests. There are plenty of Western leaders who would like to see the Russian armories depleted. But That doesn't mean that Ukraine would have been jumping at the bit for any of the deals Putin's been offering since the war began. And Ukraine hasn't been losing. Both countries have been stalling. This has been like a slog, and it has been since the first, or after the first 3 months of the war. I don't like the narrative that Ukraine's losing, because the fact that they exist at all at this point, considering the Russian armaments aligned against them, is pretty impressive.
I mean, they're pulling guys off the streets to fight.
Oh, yeah, but and Russia has their penal colony forces with the Wagner group pulling from their multiple rounds of really unpopular conscriptions, waves of immigration out of Russia. People, no, of course not. I'm not arguing that it's a matter of our investment or whether or not it's moral. War makes, unfortunately, unethical decision-making of every side, including the good ones. The Allies did plenty of bad stuff during World War II. I'm only saying that it's been a slog for both sides. I don't want to see this out in I don't want this conflict to end in a way that's going to guarantee the conflict reemerges in 2 years. If you end up just setting the border right where the fighting lines are right now, we're going to be exactly where we were back in 2014. We're going to have a combination of paid separatists and Russian soldiers moving around in the Donbass. There's going to be constant exchanges of fire across the border. This needs a real international solution. I don't know whether that means a proper DMZ. I don't know whether that means genuine reconciliation. Ideally for me, it would be some kind of Hail Mary where Ukraine gets its borders back and there's a massive coming together between Russia and the West, and we reopen trade and negotiations. But that's a little bit of a pipe dream. We do agree that, at least let's agree on this. If the line just freezes where it is right now, are we not guaranteeing another conflict in a few years?
I don't know that that's possible to say, to be honest.
People be pretty mad. People be firing across the border.
It's not guaranteeing it. I don't know.
Ukrainians, especially at the front, are not positively disposed to each other. I feel like we need to give them something solid, a solid piece, not just oh, we've decided now the slog has gone on for too long. They'd be throwing rocks at each other across the border. You could get a 5-mile wide DMZ, and they'd still be sending drones over with bricks to drop at each other's heads.
Maybe this is all.
It'd be rough.
With the case of in general, with all of the war hawks, everybody who's supported every single war over the last 20 years, it always kind of relies on this unfalsifiable counterfactual. Oh, if we didn't do this, then Vladimir Putin would be invading Poland right now. Or if the lines were drawn where they are, they'd be throwing rocks at each other or something. It's very hard to say. I think the one thing that, I think it's, again, to rely on a counterfactual, if that's what we're doing, I think the truth is that there were a lot of much better options. There were off-ramps all throughout the path to get here. And the truth is that if you want to go back to 2014, the West should not have gotten involved the way that it did. That it was such a provocation to back the overthrow of a democratically elected government. All you have to do is think to yourself and just be honest here.
We're in the past.
Well, hold on, let me just finish my point. If Russia or China had backed the overthrow of the government in Mexico or Canada because they opted to sign a trade deal with us rather than the one that they wanted them to sign, what do you think DC would do? And we all know the answer to that. They'd overthrow that government in a second. And we have a Monroe Doctrine for a reason. And you can say that it's some relic of the past that faraway superpowers ought not intervene in the region of other large nations, but we certainly wouldn't feel that way. We wouldn't think it was a relic of the past if anybody tried to come over here and set up a military alliance with Mexico or with Canada. Tell me how much DC would go, oh yes, the Monroe Doctrine is just a relic of the past.
Do you think the Bay of Pigs invasion was justified?
No.
Because the Soviets invested economically and militarily into a country that is just off our coast during a time of heightened international conflict. They knew that it would antagonize us. We already had strained relationship with Castro, even though we didn't initially, of course, because we recognized that he was a much better leader for the Cuban people than the man he replaced. Do you not think the Soviets antagonized us in a way much comparable to what we have done with NATO and Ukraine?
Yes, again,
Oh, they did. Okay. So do you think then following the Bay of Pigs? Well, wait. This isn't a gotcha. This is a gotcha. I think it's an interesting question because I do think the Soviets were a little bit wacky with how they handled Cuba. But I feel like in retrospect, we don't talk about the Bay of Pigs invasion as an inevitable consequence of expansionist Soviet investment in spite of our national interest.
See,
I think we think about it as like Kennedy's mistake, you know?
Right. Okay. But see, a lot of the reason why we think of it as Kennedy's mistake is the logistics of it. By the way, if you really want to get into it, it wasn't Kennedy's mistake as much as it was
right?
The
He followed
CIA's.
the previous administration.
But regardless of any of that, see, what you asked me is if I thought the Bay of Pigs was justified. And I would also say that, no, I don't think Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was justified. Do I think that the Soviets and the Cubans were taking a provocative stance against the United States of America? Of course. Did those provocations lead to the Bay of Pigs? I think that's undeniable. And the truth is that from Vladimir Putin's got a much stronger case about the provocations of the United States of America because it's not just one little island or one economic deal. It's been a steady push eastward since the late 90s.
Dare we revisit this one, Ryan?
Oh, Omar and Destiny, that was so good.
You set up this one, actually, and it turned out to be, again, I think the reason it did well is that it drew out kind of exactly the right contrast. That's not to say Destiny is representative of most of the public's views on Israel, most of the right's views on Israel, but he was willing to take the argument to its extremes in ways that I think were illustrative.
Yeah, I mean, Destiny is just an interesting kind of symptom of our culture. Like I'm fascinated by him.
I don't
Omar
feel
Badr
fascinated by him, but he is interesting.
Yeah.
I think seeing him as a symptom is a good point.
Yeah, and Omar, I think did a good job trying to make it as informative and enlightening as possible.
He also remained, I think, pretty steady, and that's a hard thing to do in a debate when someone is being really intense.
Talking pretty
to say
fast.
the least. Yeah, talking very fast. He had a Red Bull and was scribbling his notes down. So it's no easy feat to remain calm and I think like steady in those circumstances. And that was another reason I think the debate did well, because it was just interesting to watch.
We got to have him back. He was fun. Both of them were fun.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look.
Let me be clear about something. Right now, this rhetoric, I'm going to let it go for now. The idea is looking at all the surrounding Arab governments who are collaborating with Israel, it's a sign that they hate Palestinians. When you do opinion polling in any of these countries, all of them, including in Saudi Arabia, the overwhelming majority of the population wants to cut off any talk. They want to isolate Israel diplomatically. They don't want to deal with them. The people of the region absolutely oppose what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And the fact that you can cite a handful of governments in the surrounding area who all effectively belong to the US orbit and operate under and get tremendous privilege and financial privilege and security privilege for collaborating with the United States, and to try to paint that as some sort of validation that they have anti-Palestinian sentiment, I think is completely ridiculous and ignorant of the dynamics that actually exist in the region, a region that I grew up in, by the way. What you have,
Where?
I grew up in Kuwait, Jordan, Yemen, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, and I visited Palestine on multiple occasions.
Gotcha. Wait, you grew up in Kuwait in what years? Was that when Arafat was supporting Saddam Hussein expelling?
I was born in Kuwait in 1982, and I lived there until that war.
Okay.
And yes, when Arafat made statements in support of Saddam Hussein, that became the reason why many Palestinians could not go back to Kuwait.
Yeah, which was a really big deal too, which is also funny because those Oslo Accords, we point to Israel not being a good partner for peace. The only reason why those Oslo Accords were so horrible is because Arafat was desperately looking for a way back into Palestinian popularity after supporting Saddam Hussein when he expelled.
Speaking of Oslo, yes, and you know what was also happening, and the reason why Oslo happened is because while Arafat was looking for a way to get validation as the leader of Palestinians and come back, Israel was dealing with the fact that there is a Palestinian uprising, the first Intifada, overwhelmingly nonviolent, in which Palestinians were doing civil disobedience, sometimes throwing rocks at soldiers, and Israel was brutalizing them for year after year. After they killed so many of them that the Israeli officials started being concerned about the optics of it. So they said, don't kill them, beat them up and break their arms instead. And what you ended up with—
I'm so curious.
And what you ended up with—
I'm so much more
And what you ended up with— Allow me to finish. You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
And what you ended up with—
murder of the children. I understand. We get it.
They started beating up Palestinian protesters and seeing them brutalizing them and breaking their bones on video, and that ended up being an even bigger disaster for Israel. And they did not know what to do with that civil uprising of people who wanted to be free from occupation. And so they struck a deal with Arafat and brought him in to suppress the Intifada on the fake and false promise that they might grant Palestinians a state. Arafat fell for it, and it was all a sham made to suck the energy out of a genuine Palestinian uprising for freedom and to turn it into the fraudulent Oslo process in which Israel had cover to expand more and more settlements and entrench the occupation under the pretense of peace. That's the history of what happened.
Okay.
So what could Israel have done after October 7th that would have been, and I don't want to lump you into this camp, some people said it's about proportionality. What could Israel have done after October 7th that would have either been proportional or given some of the legitimate points that Stephen made about a densely populated area where you have a military and a civilian population crowded into hospitals, et cetera? What could Israel have done? What should they have done after October 7th that would have been a just response?
And I promise I'll address that directly, but just on the context that you just described before that, you have a situation in which it's impossible to have a situation in which Hamas is fighting not in civilian areas. I mean, when you talk about the difference in power, one side has a full-fledged military, has air force, has tanks. Hamas can't just go out in the field and confront them directly.
They have to wear civilian garb. They have to fight from hospitals. That's just a complete total lie.
You'd have to let me finish my sentence every now and then, Stephen. Seriously, like just try. In the words of Norman Finkelstein, try to have the self-possession to just listen a little bit more.
And in the style of Norman Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah,
keep
great.
going.
You have a situation in which the balance of power makes it so that those militants have to effectively use guerrilla tactics, and guerrilla tactics involve hiding in civilian areas. That's how that actually. That happens, and if you're really upset about that and you think that that's a real problem, by all means, arm Hamas the way you arm Israel, and then they can have military on military war, and we can spare the Palestinian civilians if you think that's really what's the underlying motivation. But of course, nobody would ever consider that. We only arm the criminals on one side with massive armaments. Now, on the question of what Israel should have done, there's two separate questions that often get conflated. There's the question of, is it a just war to begin with? And then there's the question of proportion. And you can imagine if people in Gaza were free and Israel was not controlling their lives and deciding how much food they get to eat and whether they can go and come back, and then some kind of attack happened, you might expect some kind of Israeli retaliation. And then the only conversation would be about proportionality. Are they doing it in a way that is defensible? And what they're currently doing is obviously not defensible, to be devastating the civilian population in order to thin that population, by the words of Israel's leader right now.
There's no source of that quote, by the way, which is it comes from the Red Line.
It comes from Israeli press reporting on internal strategic conversations
which has
that
never
happen.
been substantiated.
So yes, Israeli media makes things up.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus.
They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved, I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before.
That's what's so infuriating.
And that's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to cite, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find it by any.
That's what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories and try to discover whether they have a surplus or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you won't even admit why the blockade exists. So you don't even deserve to be in that.
What do you want him to admit? What do you want him to admit?
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
You tell me.
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
When you look at the fact that Israel is preventing cookies from going into Gaza, you know that it's not motivated by military.
Why were cookies being prevented from going in?
And
what were custom rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah.
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets. The first generation that was literally
deny Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used.
First of all, they're allowed back in because they use more sophisticated rockets. But again, he's not going to admit it. I just want to be clear another time. Another thing you're not going to admit. Why does the blockade exist? It's literally just because of the evil Jews trying to kill the Amalekite.
Hamas fighters breathe air too. Maybe Israel can restrict air from going into Gaza to make sure that Hamas
But he's saying then the burden should be on Hamas not to use.
No, Palestinians have no agency. Rape is the language of the oppressed.
You don't,
they can't help themselves.
You don't punish a civilian population to get at military ones. You don't punish civilian populations.
Like indiscriminately shooting tens of thousands of rockets decade after decade into Israel, like what Hamas does?
The scale
punishing
of
the
Israeli
civilian
violence.
population, like selling some of the humanitarian food back to the population.
Just want to make sure.
Digging up tunnels of water pipes and using them to fashion rockets.
Just want to make sure.
Taking all the international aid that comes in and building tunnels and tunnels of cement.
Stephen, did you say that Hamas is turning cookies into missiles?
My understanding is the reason for the restricting of sugar-based products was that the first generation, I think they were called Qassam rockets, were built in really crude shops using combinations of fertilizer and sugars that they would use.
Do you know what the primary component of Hamas explosives is now?
I'm pretty sure now they use more sophisticated stuff, but I don't know. You tell me.
Unexploded Israeli bombs, because they've dropped so many. Over the last decade.
I doubt that's true. I'm sure they do.
With a 10 to 20% failure rate, Hamas then digs them up. The Yasin 105s that you see, blowing up all these Israeli tanks.
I'm sure there are some amount of
primarily fueled
unexploded
by
ordnances
Israeli
that they use,
explosives.
but I doubt the majority of them are.
But there's
I'm sure there's some amount.
It's
but also,
not a
again,
mystery.
just to reiterate,
more,
you're not
more
gonna
so than
say-
cookies.
You're
I'm
not
going
going
to
to
tell
tell
you
me.
why.
Well, that's why cookies are no longer the best. Yeah,
I'm going
why
to tell
does
you
the
why.
blockade exist?
I'm going to tell you why the blockade exists.
Okay.
And the reason, by the way, why it includes banning cookies and soda pop
Keep
and
repeating
potato
that.
chips.
Yes, the Oreos aren't going into the Gaza
Yes,
Strip.
no, I'm sure it's very funny denying children the ability to eat chocolates and toys because they are Palestinian and not Israeli. That's just so incredibly trivial.
Yes.
Incredibly trivial.
The emotional appeals.
And potato chips.
It's working. We're two
Yes.
more virtue signals away from a free Palestinian people. Keep going. Yes.
It's you trivializing. If it was the other way around, if Hamas was imposing a siege on Israel in which Israeli children were not allowed to do any of that stuff, you would not be sitting here making light of it. It would not be trivial to you because you understand that Israelis are human beings and their children deserve to eat potato chips,
Jewish
and soda
people.
pops.
Sorry, hold on. How many Jewish people live in Arab countries around the world?
I don't know what the number is.
They all left. How many? When we talk about the Nakba and the expulsion of Jews, how many Jews lived in the West Bank after 48?
Thank you for the deflection.
I didn't deflect. I'm just answering your.
Let him answer about why the blockade exists.
He's not. He's got to do the 52 different talking points first.
The blockade exists.
Oh my God. Okay.
The blockade exists because they want to punish the civilian population in Gaza as a means of putting pressure on Hamas. They're saying as long as we have a government in Gaza that does not play ball with Israel the way the Palestinian Authority plays ball with Israel in the West Bank, the civilian population is going to suffer as a means of putting pressure on them and getting somebody else to be in power. The evidence for that is overwhelming. Children's toys were not allowed in at the beginning of the blockade. And when Israel came under intense pressure after the flotilla incident, a bunch of activists tried to basically force medicines to be delivered into Gaza.
So on the flotilla incident, there were 2 of 5 of the ships were empty, and they were aggressive ships that were designed to fight against the IDF when they landed. You realize that footage is available. There's 100-some people on the deck with chairs throwing Israeli soldiers overboard. And makeshift weapons and everything too.
Makeshift weapons. Wow.
Yes, I know. Well, that was all they could bring from Turkey with them, I guess, because they were inspecting the boats. But those were not peaceful activist ships. And if you read any of the reports, if you open more than a Finkelstein book and read what actually happened or watch any of the footage that actually happened,
were on that flotilla.
Were they part of the fighters, or what? Were they?
Listen to yourself. Listen to
myself. What? You can watch the videos.
There were people who, yes, fought back when Israel boarded their ship in an act of piracy in international waters.
Why did Israel border the ship?
Because they don't want ships to get to Gaza.
There you go. Because there's a blockade, and because they announced you need to stop.
They don't get to impose that blockade.
They absolutely do.
No more than Hamas gets to impose a blockade on Israel. This is ridiculous. Of course, they don't get to decide what ships get to go.
I want to reiterate by the end here. He's saying that the blockade exists because the Jews are evil.
No, he's saying they're intentionally.
That's a despicable thing to say.
Really?
I'm not saying anything about Jews. I'm talking about the Israeli government policy.
What you can't? Okay, horrendous. I'm curious. In the second Intifada, were submersibles or weapons brought in via the water into the Gaza Strip? Did that happen?
What are you talking? Say that one more time.
Were there weapons that were shipped into the Gaza Strip via the Mediterranean?
And plenty of weapons were shipped into Israel as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
there was weird thing.
Wait. So do you think the blockade?
Why is it that Egypt has been a partner with Israel in that blockade since its inception as well?
I've already explained to you why the Egyptian government is interested in restricting
because for 20 years they've just been evil.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody is this is consistent, at least with the history, that everybody is collaborators with the West and
governments that are transparently collaborating with the West
has hypnotized the world. Even the Egyptian dictators or everybody. Yes,
who also they collaborate?
I just want to say something. Honestly, there's one thing that I think is really, really important.
Okay.
This, just saying the Jews are evil. It's such a despicable line, and let me explain why. Anti-Semitism is a very, very serious and rising problem in the country, in many other places around the world, and especially in the Trump years. We've seen these shootings that have happened at synagogues and everything like that.
Not in the Middle East, though, because it's always been at 100%.
And you have a situation in which Israel's defenders constantly try to conflate those things, is that you ignore the fact that there is a significant portion of the progressive young American Jewish population that is opposed to Israeli policies. And every time you criticize Israeli policy, people say, oh, you're attacking Jews. And that's exactly what you just did. And it's not just harmful to people like me who get smeared by that accusation, completely baseless and really ugly and detestable.
It's probably more
but
true
it's
than
also,
we know, I think. But yeah.
Of Omar?
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for that wonderful speculation. But it's also actually harmful to Jewish communities themselves that are trying to protect themselves from anti-Semitism, to constantly trivialize that charge, that you throw it around at anybody who is critical of Israeli policy, anybody who thinks that Palestinians are human beings who deserve to have rights. You water that charge down so much when you let it around that real anti-Semites get more room to breathe and operate because that charge doesn't mean anything. So even if you enjoy smearing people like me and people who defend Palestinians, that's fine. But if you have any part of you that actually cares about Jewish people in this country, I would strongly advise you to stop throwing that smear around at people.
Ryan, doing the CounterPoints Friday debate format is something new, was something new for us over the course of last year. We ended up doing a lot of it. And when the election came around, it was the scheduling was different. But when we were able to do it with the scheduling and CounterPoints Friday, the two things we really like to do is have these debates that draw out contrast that's more representative of the public than what you see in corporate press. And on the other hand, do real deep dives with people like Matt Taibbi. That one did really well too. That goes into this like longer form conversation that, again, it gets beyond sort of what other people talk about in corporate press. That just like opens it up, opens the discussion, and opens the sort of Overton window up to where it serves people better.
Yeah, and I feel like some of the streamers, when they come on here, they're on a little bit better behavior. Like, because I'm wearing a tie, you're dressed up, we got a studio here, so like, they feel like they got to really bring their A game because maybe like if people beyond their normal audiences are watching. So it's the same energy but kind of packaged slightly differently in a way.
It's a good point. I think that's true. Yeah. But it's a good place to push them as well into like,
because these are important voices because they're so influential for millions and millions of people.
Yeah. And it's very different to have a debate in a studio than it is on your microphone. And in some ways, like on your microphone with your webcam. And that's not to put that down. Obviously, we all do that sometimes. So I don't have any problems with it. I think it's good in some ways and bad in other ways. And this format's good in some ways. So anyway, all that is to say, it's been a really, I think it's been a really helpful experience for us. And I'm so glad that the audience, gratified by the audience. Everyone enjoyed it. And we're looking forward to doing more.
Yeah, indeed.
All right, well, we hope everybody is having a great holiday break. Make sure to go to breakingpoints.com if you want to maybe use a little check from your grandparents to get a Breaking Points premium subscription. You can head on over to breakingpoints.com for that. Thanks so much for watching.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of CounterPoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.